I told him I want to be inconvenient with you, and he smiled like he'd been waiting for me to fight for us. Gwen Hartley was sitting in a corner booth at Sunrise Diner at 8:15 on a Thursday morning, wearing her bulky noise-canceling headphones with absolutely no music playing through them, and she knew it made her look antisocial or weird, but she didn't care because after 10 straight hours of typing medical transcriptions in a dark room, wearing these same headphones listening to doctors dictate surgical notes, she needed the silence more than she needed strangers to think she was approachable. 29 years old, medical transcriptionist for a hospital network in Columbus, Ohio, and she'd been working the night shift for 4 years now. 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. 5 nights a week, sitting in a windowless office converting audio files into medical records while the rest of the world slept. And her entire life had become this inverted thing where she ate dinner at midnight and breakfast in full daylight and never quite felt awake or asleep, just somewhere in between. The diner was packed with the morning crowd, people in business casual grabbing coffee before heading to their normal daytime jobs. Construction workers in high-vis vests ordering massive breakfasts, parents with kids getting pancakes before school, and the noise level was somewhere between busy restaurant and actual assault on her senses after 10 hours of controlled quiet. Gwen had her hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee that had gone lukewarm while she'd been staring at the menu without actually reading it, and her eyes felt like they'd been rubbed with sandpaper. That specific dry burning feeling that came from staring at a computer screen all night. And the fluorescent lights overhead were way too bright. Everything was too bright after spending her shift in a dim office with only her monitor glowing. She'd come here directly from work because going straight home meant she'd lie in bed staring at her ceiling while her neighbors mowed lawns and had loud conversations in the hallway. And at least at the diner, she could sit in a booth and exist in the daylight world for 30 minutes before going home to black out her bedroom windows and try to sleep through the afternoon. The headphones were doing their job blocking out most of the ambient noise, the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the espresso machine and the dozen overlapping conversations. And Gwen was debating whether she had the energy to actually order food or if she should just finish this coffee and go home when a small face appeared at the edge of her booth. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, wearing a purple jacket with a cartoon character Gwen didn't recognize, and light-up sneakers that blinked pink every time she shifted her weight, appeared at the edge of her booth. Behind her, a guy in a yellow safety vest was grabbing his to-go order from the counter while keeping one eye on the kid. The kid was staring at her with that intense, curious expression small children have before they learn that staring is rude, and Gwen waited for whatever was coming. Probably the kid asking if she could have Gwen's booth, or if she'd seen someone's lost stuffed animal. "Do you need a friend?" the little girl asked, and her voice was matter-of-fact, no pity or concern in it, just a genuine question, and Gwen's brain completely stalled out trying to process what she'd just been asked, because that was not on the list of things she'd expected a random 5-year-old to say. The kid kept going before Gwen could formulate a response, tilting her head slightly and pointing at the headphones. "Are you hiding?" "My dad says headphones mean hiding. I hide under my bed when it's too loud." Gwen felt something crack in her defensive wall. This kid had just read her more accurately in 10 seconds than most adults managed in years, and instead of the annoyed response she'd been preparing, she let out this surprised, genuine laugh, the first real laugh she'd had in probably a week. "Yeah, I guess I am hiding from the loud. You're right about that," Gwen said, and she pulled the headphones down around her neck because having this conversation through one ear felt wrong. "Your dad sounds pretty smart. Where is he?" The little girl pointed toward the counter where a guy was paying for a to-go order, and Gwen could see him from the back, tall, wearing jeans and a bright yellow high-visibility vest over a gray Henley, work boots that had seen better days, and he had a messenger bag slung over his shoulder and was clearly in that mode of trying to get through a transaction quickly. The kid looked back at Gwen with this very serious expression. "He's probably gonna say sorry for me bothering you, but I wasn't bothering you, right? I was just asking a question." "You weren't bothering me at all. You were just incredibly accurate, which is different," Gwen said, and the kid smiled like she'd just won something. The guy at the counter finished paying and turned around scanning the diner for his daughter, and his face shifted from casual to mildly panicked when he spotted her standing at Gwen's booth. And he walked over quickly with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he was used to his kid wandering off. Up close, Gwen could see he was probably mid-30s, needed a shave, had the kind of perpetual tiredness around his eyes that came from single parenting, and the yellow vest had City of Columbus Water Department printed across the back. "Penny, I told you not to bother the people in the booths." "I'm so sorry," he said, and he was looking at Gwen with this apologetic expression while reaching for his daughter's hand, and Penny pulled away, crossing her arms. "I wasn't bothering her, Dad. I was asking if she needed a friend because she was hiding from the loud with her headphones." The guy looked at Gwen's headphones and then at her face, trying to gauge if his daughter had just committed some major social violation, and Gwen smiled and gestured to the empty seat across from her. "She's not bothering me. She's just incredibly accurate, like I said. Your kid's got good observation skill," Gwen said, and the guy's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he let out this tired laugh. "Yeah, she's observant to a fault sometimes. Notices things I wish she wouldn't. I'm Hollis, by the way. This is Penny. We were just grabbing breakfast before I drop her at my sister's and start my route." He said it like an explanation and an apology at the same time, and Gwen realized he was probably used to his daughter's questions causing problems. "I'm Gwen. I just got off work, so my brain's kind of fried. But honestly, your daughter just made my morning by calling out my antisocial headphone situation," Gwen said, and Penny looked pleased with herself. Hollis shifted the messenger bag on his shoulder, and Gwen could see it was stuffed with what looked like paperwork and a walkie-talkie clipped to the outside. "You work nights?" he asked, and it wasn't nosy, just curious, and Gwen nodded. "Medical transcriptionist, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., been doing it for 4 years. It pays decent, but my sleep schedule's completely destroyed. Everything's too bright right now." Hollis made a sound that was half laugh, half commiseration. "I'm up at 4:30 every morning to get Penny ready, grab breakfast with her, then drop her at my sister's before my shift starts at 9. I read water meters for the city, walk about 8 miles a day checking municipal accounts. By 5 p.m., I'm done and ready to pass out, but I've got to pick her up and figure out dinner, so I feel you on the destroyed sleep schedule." They stood there in this moment of mutual recognition, two people whose lives were structured around work schedules that didn't align with normal human rhythms, and Penny was looking between them like she was watching a tennis match. The waitress appeared with Hollis's to-go order in a plastic bag, and he took it, checked his watch, and made a face that suggested he was running later than he wanted to be. "I've got to get moving or I'm going to be late for drop-off, but it was nice meeting you, Gwen. Thanks for not being annoyed at Penny's interrogation." He guided Penny toward the door with a hand on her shoulder, and Penny waved at Gwen with this enthusiastic full-arm wave that made Gwen smile despite her exhaustion. Gwen sat there for another 20 minutes after they left, actually ordered food this time, scrambled eggs and toast that she ate mechanically while thinking about that interaction, and something about it had pierced through the fog of her night shift isolation in a way nothing else had in months. She'd been living in this bubble where she worked alone, slept alone, existed in the dark while everyone else lived in daylight, and having someone recognize that she was hiding without making it into this big emotional thing felt weirdly validating. And the fact that it came from a 5-year-old with light-up shoes and a guy in a safety vest made it somehow better. Thursday became Tuesday became Thursday again, and Gwen found herself back at Sunrise Diner the following week. Same corner booth, same headphones around her neck this time, instead of over her ears, because some part of her was hoping maybe she'd see them again, even though the odds were terrible. She ordered coffee and was halfway through scrolling her phone when she heard a familiar small voice say, "You came back. Are you still hiding from the loud?" And when Gwen looked up, Penny was there again, this time holding a stuffed dinosaur and wearing different light-up shoes. These ones were green. Hollis appeared a second later looking slightly less panicked this time, carrying 2 to-go bags instead of 1. And when he saw Gwen, he smiled, this genuine thing that made him look less tired. "We keep running into you, starting to think this is your regular spot," he said, and Gwen shrugged. "It's the only place I can handle after shift. Too much of stimulation anywhere else. Plus the coffee's decent, and nobody asks me why I'm eating breakfast at 8:30 in the morning when normal people are already at work. Tell me about it. I get weird looks when I try to explain I've been up since 4:30, and this is basically my lunch break," Hollis said, and he checked his watch again. this constant thing he seemed to do, and Penny tugged on his vest. Dad, can we sit with Gwen for a minute? I don't want to eat in the car again. It makes crumbs everywhere. Hollis looked at Gwen with this questioning expression, and Gwen slid over in the booth making room. And somehow that turned into 30 minutes of the three of them eating breakfast together. Penny chattering about the game she played at her aunt's house, and Hollis explaining his meter reading route, and Gwen talking about the weirdest medical terminology she'd had to transcribe that week. When they finally left because Hollis was genuinely going to be late if they didn't move, he paused at the booth and said, "We're here most Tuesdays and Thursdays around this time if you want company, no pressure, but Penny's already decided you're her friend, and arguing with her is pointless. I learned that when she was 3. Gwen felt something warm settle in her chest, this small offer of consistent human contact that didn't require her to fundamentally change her schedule or pretend to be awake when she wasn't. Yeah, I could do Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm here anyway. And Hollis smiled, and Penny gave her another enthusiastic wave, and they left. That's how it started, not with some dramatic meet cute or instant attraction, just two exhausted people whose schedules accidentally aligned for 30 minutes twice a week in a diner that was too loud and too bright, and a 5-year-old who'd asked a stranger if she needed a friend and somehow been exactly right. What started as accidental Tuesday and Thursday breakfasts in a too loud diner turned into the most consistent thing in Gwen's life over the next 3 months, and she realized somewhere around week 6 that she'd started structuring her entire week around those 30-minute windows where she got to sit across from someone who understood that being functional at 8:30 in the morning required a specific kind of resilience most people didn't have. They didn't do traditional dates because their schedules made evening dinners or weekend activities basically impossible. Hollis had Penny full-time, and both their mornings started before most people were awake. And Gwen's nights ended when most people were already starting their workday. So they built something in the margins, in that weird overlap between her shift end and his shift start. The routine became this anchor point Gwen didn't know she needed. She'd clock out at 8 a.m. and drive straight to Sunrise Diner. And Hollis would already be there in his yellow safety vest, with Penny coloring on kids' menus. And they'd have until Hollis had to leave for his route at 8:45. 30 minutes twice a week doesn't sound like much, but it added up in ways that surprised her. She learned he took his coffee with 2 sugars and no cream, that he always ordered the same thing, which was eggs over medium and wheat toast, that Penny had strong opinions about which crayons were best for coloring different things and would share detailed reasoning if you asked. Hollis learned that Gwen survived on black coffee and would order food, but then forget to eat it while she was talking, that she had this habit of massaging her right wrist while she talked, because 10 hours of typing every night meant her tendons were constantly inflamed, that she wore the same rotation of comfortable clothes because fashion required energy she didn't have after a night shift. One Thursday morning in late June, Hollis noticed her wincing while she tried to pick up her coffee mug, and without asking, he reached across the table and took her right hand, and he started working his thumb into the cramped muscles of her forearm with the kind of practice pressure that came from knowing how to work out knots. My hands cramp up from gripping the meter reader all day. Learn some basic massage stuff from a physical therapist video on YouTube. This helping, or am I making it worse? Hollis asked, and Gwen felt the tension in her forearm start to release under his hands, and she let out this involuntary sound that was half relief, half embarrassment. That's helping. Oh my God, that's helping. I've been dealing with this for months, and my doctor just keeps telling me to take ibuprofen and use a wrist brace. They sat there with him methodically working through the tight spots in her wrist and forearm while Penny narrated her coloring process. And it was this weirdly intimate moment that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with two people who understood physical exhaustion. By July, they'd progressed from breakfast acquaintances to something that felt like actual dating, even though they'd never explicitly called it that. And one Tuesday, Hollis showed up 10 minutes early without Penny because his sister had taken her for the morning, and he slid into the booth across from Gwen and immediately started unlacing his heavy work boots with this grimace that suggested his feet were killing him. 8 miles yesterday in new boots because my old ones finally gave up. I've got blisters on my blisters. Remind me why I thought waterproof was worth breaking in new leather, Hollis said, and he pulled off the boot in his sock, and Gwen could see the angry red patches on his heel. That looks terrible. Do you have bandages? You can't walk your route like that, Gwen said, and she was already digging in her bag for the first aid kit she kept because working nights meant being prepared for random emergencies. She pulled out blister pads and antibiotic ointment and slid out of her side of the booth to crouch next to his feet. And Hollis protested that she didn't have to do this. But Gwen ignored him and carefully applied the blister pads to both heels before he put his socks back on. There, that should at least keep them from getting worse. But seriously consider calling in if they're too bad. Infection in your feet when you walk 8 miles a day is not a joke. Hollis looked at her with this expression she couldn't quite read, something soft and surprised, and he said, "Thank you. Nobody's taken care of my feet since my ex-wife." And that's a weird thing to say out loud, but I mean it. Appreciate you. They had 15 minutes before he had to leave, and they spent it in this comfortable quiet, not needing to fill every second with conversation, just existing in the same space. And when Hollis finally had to go, he squeezed her shoulder on his way out, and Gwen felt that touch for the rest of her day. Late August hit, and Gwen got called into her supervisor's office on a Tuesday night halfway through her shift, and her immediate thought was that she'd screwed something up or they were cutting positions. But instead, her supervisor told her they were promoting her to day shift supervisor starting September 1st. Salary bump, better hours, finally off the night shift she'd been stuck on for 4 years. Gwen said yes automatically because this was what she'd been working toward. This was the goal. Normal human hours and daylight and a life that didn't feel inverted. But the second she left that office, her brain started doing the math on what this meant for her schedule. Day shift supervisor meant 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, strict schedule because she'd be managing a team, no flexibility to come in late or leave early, and Hollis worked 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., which meant their 8:15 breakfast overlap was about to completely disappear. She sat at her desk staring at her monitor, trying to feel excited about the promotion, but mostly just feeling this sinking dread about losing the one consistent good thing in her week, and she pulled out her phone and texted Hollis, even though he was definitely asleep because it was 1 in the morning. Got promoted to day shift supervisor, starts September 1st, 8 to 5 schedule. I'm really happy about it, but it means no more. Tuesday, Thursday breakfast, we need to figure out a new plan. She hit send and went back to work, and around 7 a.m., when she was wrapping up for the night, her phone buzzed with his response. "That's amazing, congrats. We'll figure something out. Maybe weekend breakfast or evenings when Penny's with my sister. Don't stress about it." The words were supportive, but Gwen could read between them. Weekends were packed for both of them, and evenings meant Hollis would have to arrange childcare, and she'd be exhausted from adjusting to a new sleep schedule. And neither of those options had the easy built-in consistency of what they'd had. September 1st came, and Gwen started her new position, and the first week was this chaos of training and learning new systems and managing people, which was completely different from sitting alone transcribing, and she'd get home at 6 p.m. completely wiped and barely able to function. She and Hollis tried texting throughout the day, but his route kept him outside without reliable service, and her new position meant she couldn't be on her phone during work hours. So the messages that used to be constant became sporadic. They tried to meet for dinner one Thursday, but Hollis's sister canceled on watching Penny last minute, and they rescheduled for the following Tuesday, but Gwen had to stay late for a system upgrade, and by the time she was done, Hollis had already put Penny to bed. 3 weeks into September, they'd seen each other exactly once, a 15-minute coffee meetup on a Sunday afternoon that felt rushed and awkward because they were both aware of how little time they had. And Gwen could feel the relationship starting to drift in this terrible slow-motion way where neither of them was doing anything wrong. They were just busy, just tired, just trying to survive their respective schedules. The texts got shorter, went from paragraphs to single sentences to just logistical check-ins about whether they could possibly meet up. And every time the answer was no because of some conflict, and Gwen started to feel like she was watching something good slowly die from neglect. October came in cold and wet, and Gwen found herself crying in her car in the office parking lot before work on a Wednesday. Just sitting there with her hands on the steering wheel, feeling like adulthood was this terrible process of watching good things fade away because you were too busy surviving to maintain them properly. She and Hollis hadn't seen each other in person in 2 weeks, hadn't had an actual conversation that wasn't via text in almost a month, and she could feel him pulling away, not because he wanted to, but because what was the point of trying to date someone you literally never saw? She texted him that night after work, something she'd been avoiding because putting it into words made it real. I hate this. I hate that we never see each other. I hate that my promotion means we don't get our breakfast mornings. I feel like we're just slowly fading, and I don't know how to fix it. She sent it at 11 p.m., knowing he'd be asleep and wouldn't see it until morning. And when his response came at 5:30 a.m., while she was getting ready for work, it just said, I hate it too. I miss you. But I don't know what the solution is when our schedules don't align anywhere. Feels impossible. They kept trying because neither of them wanted to be the one who gave up. Planned a Saturday breakfast for mid-October, a real sit-down meal where they'd have actual time to talk and reconnect. And Gwen had been looking forward to it all week, like it was going to fix everything that had been broken by their schedules. Friday night, Hollis texted at 8 p.m., and Gwen's phone was on her desk while she was reviewing reports. And when she finally checked it an hour later, she saw the message. Penny's got the stomach flu. She's been throwing up since 6. I can't leave her tomorrow. I'm really sorry. Can we reschedule? Gwen sat there staring at that message and felt something in her give way. Not anger because it wasn't his fault. Just this bone-deep exhaustion with trying to make something work when the universe kept throwing obstacles. She typed back, it's fine. Take care of her. Hope she feels better soon. And hit send, and the words looked supportive on the screen. But inside, she felt defeated. Felt like this was the quiet end of their relationship. Not a dramatic breakup, but just a slow fade into logistics and conflicting schedules until they both stopped trying. She went to bed that night in her apartment that she'd finally decorated for daytime living. Blackout curtains gone and actual natural light coming through the windows. And she should have been happy about her promotion and her normal schedule and her life finally aligning with the rest of humanity. But instead, she just felt alone in a way she hadn't when she was working nights. Because at least then, she'd had those Tuesday and Thursday mornings, had something to look forward to, had someone who understood what it meant to be awake when your body wanted to be asleep. Now she was just another person with a 9-to-5 drowning in the mundane exhaustion of trying to be a functional adult, and the person who'd made that exhaustion feel less isolating was somewhere across the city dealing with his own life, and she didn't know how to bridge that distance anymore. Tuesday came around again, and Gwen was sitting in the break room at her office at 12:15, staring at the microwave, while her lean cuisine rotated on the turntable. And she'd been sitting there for 10 minutes watching this same meal go around and around without actually being hungry for it, because her brain was stuck on the fact that it had been 3 weeks since she'd seen Hollis in person and 5 days since their last text exchange that had been longer than 3 words. The microwave beeped, and she didn't move, just kept sitting there at the break room table with her phone face up next to her, showing no new notifications, and something about the fluorescent lights and the beige walls and the sound of her coworkers talking about their weekend plans made her feel more isolated than she'd ever felt working alone at 3 in the morning. She'd spent the last month waiting for circumstances to become convenient, waiting for their schedules to magically align or for some solution to present itself. And all that waiting had accomplished was watching something good slowly starve from lack of proximity. And sitting here staring at her reheated pasta, she realized that relationships didn't survive on good intentions and occasional texts. They survived on active, inconvenient effort, on someone deciding that the other person was worth disrupting their lunch break for. Gwen pulled out her phone and opened her messages with Hollis, scrolled up through weeks of logistical texts about failed meetup attempts, and found the conversation from 2 months ago, where he'd mentioned his Tuesday route covered the industrial park district on the east side. She checked the time, 12:17. She had a 45-minute lunch break that technically started at noon, but she'd been sitting here for the last 15 minutes accomplishing nothing. And if she left right now, she could drive to the industrial park and maybe find him. Or maybe waste her entire lunch break walking around looking for a guy in a safety vest in a district that covered probably 6 square blocks. Gwen stood up and grabbed her coat and left the lean cuisine rotating in the microwave. And she walked out of the break room past her supervisor's office, hoping nobody stopped her to ask where she was going, because she didn't have a good explanation that didn't sound unhinged. The drive to the industrial park took 12 minutes in midday traffic, and Gwen parked on a side street and got out into cold October air, wearing her office clothes, slacks and a blouse that were completely wrong for walking around an industrial district, and she started scanning the sidewalks for any sign of a bright yellow safety vest. The industrial park was this maze of commercial buildings and warehouses, delivery trucks backing into loading docks, and the smell of diesel exhaust and coffee from a food truck parked on the corner. And Gwen walked 2 blocks, checking every person she passed before she started to feel like this was a terrible idea and she should just go back to work. She turned onto Mechanic Street, which was this wide road lined with auto body shops and HVAC suppliers, and she was about to give up when she spotted him 3 blocks down, crouched next to a commercial water main on a busy corner. And even from this distance, she recognized the yellow vest and the messenger bag on the ground next to him, and the way he had his clipboard balanced on his knee while he wrote. Gwen walked faster, her work shoes clicking on the concrete, and she was breathing hard by the time she got close enough that he might hear her. And when she stopped a few feet away, Hollis was so focused on recording meter numbers, he didn't notice her standing there. "Hollis," Gwen said, and her voice came out more breathless than she intended. And Hollis looked up with this expression of complete confusion, like his brain couldn't process why someone from his personal life was appearing in the middle of his work route. And he stood up quickly, brushing dirt off his jeans. "Gwen, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" His first assumption was clearly that something was wrong, that she wouldn't be here unless there was an emergency. And Gwen shook her head, trying to catch her breath. "I'm fine, nothing's wrong. I have 45 minutes for lunch, and I spent 25 of them driving here and walking around an industrial park looking for a neon vest because I couldn't sit in my office break room one more day pretending I was fine with how things are," Gwen said. And the words came out rushed and slightly incoherent, but she kept going. "We never see each other, and I hate it. I know our schedules are a nightmare, and I know it's inconvenient, but I don't want to just let this fade out because we're too busy. I want to be inconvenient with you. I want to use my lunch breaks to track you down on random street corners if that's what it takes." Hollis was just staring at her, and Gwen couldn't read his expression, and for a horrible second she thought maybe she'd miscalculated. Maybe he'd already mentally checked out of this relationship, and she'd just made a fool of herself by showing up unannounced. But then his face broke into this massive, relieved smile, and he tossed his work gloves onto his clipboard. "I thought I was losing you to your day schedule. Thought maybe it was easier for you to just let it go than keep trying to make this work. I've been walking around for 3 weeks feeling like I should text you more, but not wanting to be clingy when you're busy. I don't want easy. I want this. I want you and Penny and Tuesday breakfasts, even if we have to schedule them at weird times. I just need to know we're actually trying and not just going through the motions until one of us gets tired of it," Gwen said. And Hollis stepped forward and pulled her into a hug right there on the sidewalk. And she wrapped her arms around him under the safety vest and felt him solid and real instead of just a name on her phone screen. They stood there for probably longer than was appropriate for a public street corner. And when they pulled apart, Hollis checked his watch and grimaced. "I've got 3 more meters on this block, and then I'm technically on my lunch break. You got time to sit somewhere for 20 minutes, or do you need to get back?" Hollis asked. And Gwen checked her phone. 12:42. She had 18 minutes before she needed to leave to make it back to the office by 1. "I've got 18 minutes. Where can we sit?" They ended up on a concrete curb outside a welding supply shop, sitting side by side with their shoulders touching, while Hollis ate a sandwich from his messenger bag, and Gwen wasn't hungry, but sat with him anyway, just existing in the same physical space. "So we need an actual plan, not just hoping we'll accidentally have free time at the same moment," Hollis said between bites of his sandwich, and Gwen nodded. "My lunch break is 12 to 12:45. If you can tell me where your Tuesday and Thursday routes are, I can come find you. It's not ideal, but it's 30 minutes twice a week, which is better than nothing." Hollis pulled out his phone and showed her his route schedule. Tuesdays he covered the industrial park. Thursdays, he was in the warehouse district near the airport. Both places Gwen could reasonably drive to in her lunch window. They sat there working out logistics like they were planning a military operation, and it wasn't romantic in any traditional sense, but it felt important, felt like they were actively choosing to make this work instead of passively letting circumstances destroy it. Gwen's phone alarm went off at 12:57, and she stood up reluctantly. I've got to go or I'm going to be late, but I'll see you Thursday. Same deal. I'll find you somewhere in the warehouse district. Hollis stood too and kissed her forehead. I'll text you the specific blocks I'll be covering. Make it easier to track me down. And Gwen, thank you for showing up, for not giving up on this. 4 months later, on a Saturday in late May, Gwen was sitting on a concrete curb outside a coffee shop near her apartment at noon, eating a peanut butter sandwich from a Tupperware container, and Hollis was next to her eating his usual turkey and cheese. And Penny was sitting between them, drawing on the sidewalk with colored chalk, creating this elaborate cityscape that sprawled across 3 concrete squares. They had an hour before Hollis needed to get Penny to her friend's birthday party, and they weren't talking about anything important, just Penny's upcoming school play, and Hollis's new work boots, and Gwen's frustration with her office coffee machine. Mundane stuff that felt significant because they were saying it to each other in person instead of via text. A jogger passed by and gave them a curious look, seeing them sitting on a curb with a kid drawing in chalk. And Gwen didn't bother explaining because how do you explain that this was her relationship? Stolen hours on concrete curbs, eating sandwiches, while city life moved around them. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she thought about dating, wasn't fancy dinners or weekend getaways, but it was real and it was theirs, and it worked because they'd both decided it was worth the inconvenience. Gwen sat on that concrete curb on a warm May morning, watching city life move around them. And Hollis didn't have a grand speech prepared about love or commitment, and he hadn't magically fixed their messy schedules or made their lives suddenly align perfectly. He just had an hour on a Saturday morning and a willingness to spend every single second of it sitting exactly right here, on this curb eating a sandwich and listening to his daughter explain her chalk cityscape. They didn't need a fairy tale with perfect timing and romantic gestures. They just needed someone willing to cross the city in the middle of a Tuesday to prove they weren't forgotten. Someone who understood that love wasn't about grand moments, but about showing up consistently in small ones. And looking at Hollis laughing with Penny about whether purple was an acceptable color for a fire truck, Gwen realized the distance between them had never been so vast after all. It just required both of them to walk toward each other, even when it was inconvenient, even when it meant eating lunch on a concrete curb, even when the easy thing would have been to let it fade. Because sometimes the best relationships aren't built in romantic restaurants or on weekend vacations. Sometimes they're built on industrial park corners and concrete curbs by 2 people who decided that 30 minutes twice a week was worth rearranging their entire lunch breaks for. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. Wherever you're listening from, we appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in the next story.